He's a two-time National Coach of the Year. And since 2000, he has guided the TCU Horned Frogs, and he has taken them to a high level of success. We know this because in 2010, he guided them to a perfect season of 13-0 and a number 2 national ranking. We also know that he's won 6 conference championships, 1 in Conference USA, 4 in Mountain West, and a Big 12 championship back in 2014. You know, with the Gary Patterson squad, you're always going to get a hard-hitting, a very physical-type squad. And even though they didn't win the Big 12 last year, they did get to the Big 12 title game and ended 2017 with an 11-win record. We are going to begin with the defense because this is a big reason why TCU wins on a regular basis and why I still have them finishing high in the Big 12, even though I know they've lost some key personnel. Now, you probably have heard me mention this a couple of times if you've watched my blogs throughout the years. Chad Glasgow, the defensive coordinator for TCU, we were teammates in high school football, believe it or not, 1988 Woodward High School. And Glasgow, since the early 1990s, has been a part of college football as a player, as a grad assistant, and, of course, as a defensive coach. In fact, at one point, he was a defensive coordinator for the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And prior to that was a safeties coach for TCU, but came back to TCU after the Texas Tech gig and has been a defensive coordinator. And last year, he guided the Horned Frogs to number 1 in the Big 12 in all the major defensive categories. Scoring, giving up just 19 points per game, and also, too, included in that, total defense, 331 yards per game allowed. So TCU, they came ready to play on that side of the ball. Despite the loss of Matt Boesen at defensive end, you do return another defensive end who might be the best in the Big 12. That is Ben Banogu at 6'4", 245, a nightmare for the opposition to try to contain. 55 tackles a year ago, including 16.5 tackles for loss. So Ben Banogu, one to watch this year. The other side, you have L.J. Collier. At defensive tackle, you do return Corey Bethley, who had 26 stops. But a notable loss for TCU just recently, Ross Blacklock with an Achilles injury. He's done for the season, so that will hurt somewhat for that TCU defensive line, but they'll still be good. And speaking of good, he was real good. Traven Howard, the all-Big 12 linebacker, but his time is done. So I got to think the new leader for this linebacking core is going to be Ty Summers, the veteran, strong side linebacker, had 4 sacks a year ago and also contributed with 64 tackles. Now, Jawan Johnson, they're getting him from Northern Illinois, and he should assume the role at middle linebacker. And if his stats from Northern Illinois are any indication, then TCU will be just fine at middle linebacker. At Northern Illinois, Johnson had 98 tackles and had 4 sacks. And moving from safety to linebacker is Garrett Wallow, who should help because of his physicality. Secondary is an interesting position to watch because last season when the Horned Frogs had multi-interception games, which didn't happen often, they were perfect 4-0. Of course, we've known TCU in the past to be notorious for interceptions, but last year had a bit of a drop-off in this area. And it's going to be a little bit tougher because you don't have Anthony Tejada at the corner or Nick Orr at the safety, even though I know Orr was really known as a tackling defensive back. But you still have experience, and this is one big benefit to a TCU defense. Year in and year out, they're able to get freshmen and sophomores quality playing time. So I don't expect much of a drop-off at all for the Horned Frogs defensively. At the corner, Jeff Gladney comes back. He had experience last year, 28 tackles. At a free safety position in Nico Small, 46 stops, strong safety, 37 tackles from Ennis Gaines. And Ridwan Izahaku, he comes back. He has safety experience with 66 tackles. So I think TCU will still be a defensive menace. And I think they and Texas will probably be the 2 best defenses in the Big 12. Now let's look at the offense for the Horned Frogs, who I thought were good last year. Not great offensively, but they were good nationally, 419 yards per game, which was 45th out of 130 teams. Kenny Hill is gone. I thought he was a good quarterback, but at times just wasn't consistent when it came to throwing the deep ball. Now, Sean Robinson now takes over quarterback, just a sophomore, of course, limited playing time a year ago, but you are getting one heck of an athletic quarterback. And if Robinson can show that ability to connect on the deep ball, and believe me, TCU has the wide receivers to make it happen, this passing attack can be better than the one that they had last year, despite Hill's absence this season. And talking a little bit about the running attack, Kyle Hicks might have been the main guy at the beginning of last season, but when you look at the statistics, when it was all said and done, it was actually Darius Anderson who was the #1 guy. Anderson led the team in rushing with 768 yards, 8 touchdowns, and had 6 yards per carry. Kyle Hicks, now departed, averaged just 4.3 yards per carry. So I think the ground game is in good hands with Darius Anderson leading the way. Receivers, they're still going to be loaded at speed despite losing their number 2 and 3 guys, respectively, in Desmond White and John Diarse. You do return the #1 receiver, who last year was a freshman, in Jalen Rieger, and I do think he'll be in the NFL one day. Led the team in reception yardage, about 600 yards, but had 8 touchdowns to make an immediate impact. Devontae Turpin, we know he features a lot of speed. Last season, had almost 400 yards in reception yardage and 41 catches. But his biggest threat is on special teams, which we'll talk about later. And do expect TCU to use Tay Barber, one of their top recruits. Think he will play as a true freshman at the wideout position. And finally, talking about the offensive line and special teams, the OL, yeah, they do lose some valuable pieces, but they get some back too. Lucas Niang comes back at the right tackle position. He's a junior. And at the left guard spot, returning is Cordell Iwagawu. So you've got those 2 guys back. And in addition, from the JUCO ranks, Anthony McKinney, 6'7", 300 pounds. Matter of fact, he was an early TCU enrollee, so he's got some familiarity with that Horned Frog offensive line, so that helps out a lot. Special teams will be one of the strongest, perhaps, in the country. Field goal kicking last year, 16 kicks, and TCU only missed 2. That's right, 14 of 16. They have a 3-year starter at punter in Adam Nunez, and Devontae Turpin, the most dangerous punt returner in all the country with his blazing speed, and he'll also, too, be returning kicks. The schedule for TCU, I think, works out nicely. 8 of the 12 games that they play are in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And that will include the battle for the Iron Skillet, the 2nd game of the year in Dallas against SMU. The 3rd game will be a nationwide attention getter in prime time against Ohio State, but no Urban Meyer serving the 3rd of his 3-game suspension. So Ohio State, obviously, Urban Meyer-less for the battle in Arlington. I'd probably pick Ohio State to win this game, primarily because Ohio State's strength is the defensive line, and TCU's offensive line, inexperience in some spots, I don't think will be completely gelled by game number 3. Still too soon for those guys. The following week, though, you got Texas on the road. I think TCU will fare a little bit better in that game, but don't expect much points in that matchup from Austin. 5 of the 9 TCU games, by the way, are at home. Only 4 conference road games, and 2 of them are at Kansas and at Baylor. You talk about a big break on the schedule. I think that's one of the reasons why TCU is going to finish high, is because their schedule is more favorable than average. Of course, you've got that matchup against Oklahoma October 20th. As painful as it is for me to say it, I do think TCU will pull off the upset in the regular season matchup between those 2 teams from Fort Worth. But Horned Frogs got to be careful, because near the end of the season, November 10th, they're going to be facing a dangerous offense on the road, the West Virginia Mountaineers. TCU will still have a top-notch defense. It'll still be well-coached, and the schedule is pretty favorable because other than Ohio State, Texas, the biggest games for the Horned Frogs are spaced out nicely on the schedule. So I've got the Horned Frogs picked 2nd in the Big 12. Just a reminder, August 29th, that's the date that I'll have my major conference championship pick show. And during that show, I'll also pick who I think will be in the college football playoff. We'll see you next time.